Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. Well, where do I even start? For those of you who saw my Daytona 500 recap 2 weeks ago today, you learned that I was unable to attend the 500 because I was sick in bed with a high fever. Well, unfortunately, it got even worse. I have had atrial fibrillation for years, and later that day, my heart started, ironically enough, racing at a high rate. So I made what I hoped to be a short trip to the ER. They were unable to get it under control and had to admit me to the hospital. I was diagnosed with the flu for the first time ever in my life. I've been told multiple times since that it's a particularly bad strain this year. I have no reference point, but damn, it sure did kick my butt. Thankfully, the staff at Advent Health, yes, that big NASCAR sponsor, was able to get my heart rate under control, pumped me full of IV fluids, and I was released the next day. However, it delayed my flight return by a day, and my wife and I returned home on Wednesday. Being fully honest, my Frankie Muniz video last Tuesday was the first time I had gotten out of bed for any length of time, and it was a struggle. I remained in bed for a couple days after that, and then mustered up enough strength to head down to Circuit of the Americas on Friday for the first day of the race weekend. I have to say, when I arrived in the media center, and before I even sat down and plugged my computer in, a photographer working the race weekend came up to me and told me how much he enjoyed watching my channel. That was really a nice little boost of energy. On Friday, I had a chance to interview my friend and Xfinity Series driver, Jeremy Clements, on his 500th Xfinity Series start. Just a little background, Jeremy has been so good to me through the years. He's the only driver I've ever worked with personally, and that was producing race recap videos for the number 51 team on my other channel after the checkered flag back in 2022. So I was really happy to visit with him on Friday and talk about his big milestone. Saturday, as you guys have learned by now, is a big day for the media. That's when drivers meet with reporters and answer questions. I will say this is going to be my race recap video, but I will have several separate videos from that session that I will put out this week, including my one-on-one interview with Michael McDowell, which is compelling because he talks about the adoption of his son from China. Plus, he discusses the actions of Carson Hocevar at Atlanta and what the young driver needs to do moving forward. In addition, I have several other videos where I ask drivers a single question, including what they think about Larry McReynold's suggestion that the only flag a race ends under is the checkered flag. I'll have all the drivers' responses in that video, but we'll share a couple of the more interesting ones in this video. I also asked drivers about the recently formed playoff committee and what they think about the possibility of Sunday's race at COTA being the last one. And finally, the last single topic video is on how much drivers spend on average in the simulator. I found these responses really surprising. So be on the lookout for those videos later this week. Now, as I just mentioned, I asked the drivers about Larry Mac's suggestion last week on SiriusXM NASCAR radio that the only way a race ends is with a checkered flag. Here's what he said.
So again, to me, I'm tossing it out there. It may be the recipe for a bunch of torn up race cars. Owners and drivers may go, my God, that man has gone mad and lost his mind. But to me, one thing that would solve all this, what we've dealt with, what Brad and Lee Spencer dealt with last night, we've dealt with, Mike and Pete. The only flag that can end the race is a checkered flag waving.
Now, take a listen to what two-time champion Kyle Busch and three-time champion Joey Logano had to say about America's crew chief's remarks.
It's easy to say when you're not sitting in the race car. It doesn't hurt Larry Mack when he gets clobbered, right? Like, he's not in there to feel that. It's not his head, it's not his body. I think you got to think safety first, right? I think it's got to be number one priority in motorsports, and really in anything. You got to be thinking, okay, how do we keep our drivers safe? How do we keep our pit crew safe? How do we keep, because no one wants to see someone get hurt. I don't want to see someone get hurt. And, NASCAR just has to be consistent on doing that. So then the drivers are then trained to not be wide open through crashes in the last lap, or in any lap, to be frank. So it's probably different for when you're inside the car. It's a little different perspective a lot of times.
Well, he's not a driver, and he's never been in a race car and been T-boned or hit a wall at 180 miles an hour, so he has no say. So the rest of us drivers that are out there that are risking it all, putting it on the line for good shows and entertainment, Racing to the checker flag would be pure entertainment and not safety. So I disagree with that. I think if you have a 30th place car and 5 cars behind him that get tangled up in a crash, race it out. But when the wreck is happening in 5th place and there's still 30 others that have to go through the accident scene in turn 3, you can't race through that. That's unsafe.
But that wasn't the only gem Rowdy delivered on Saturday. As I mentioned, I asked drivers about the playoff committee, what they thought about it, and what they hope to come out of it. And this is what Mr. Busch had to say.
Yeah, I guess there's 5 or 6 or 8 or 10. I don't even know how many committees they are, but nobody calls me to be on any of them. So I feel real honored with that, and look forward to hearing what their changes are.
Kyle Busch was on a roll. Oh, just wait, there's more where that came from on Sunday. Speaking of, let's talk about Sunday and not the race, but the Tweet Up. This was my first time to attend a Tweet Up, and I really enjoyed visiting with the fans and even taking a few photos. Here's the group photo we took when we all said we miss you, Bob, with Bob Pockrass being in Florida covering the IndyCar season opener. You can see I'm in the back, and standing right next to me is Eric Estep of Out of the Groove. I have to say, he and I sat right next to each other at Daytona and had a great conversation on Thursday before I unfortunately got sick. We had another good chat this weekend at COTA. Possible collaboration in the future? And now it's time to talk about that race. Okay, in a second. First, I have to mention my close call with the Stormtroopers. So, as I've done for all the previous 4 races at COTA, I stood at the beginning of pit road and captured the drivers coming around the final turn, taking the green flag, and heading down the front stretch up the hill into turn 1. This year, however, I hustled my way around the media center to capture the cars coming around the final turns and completing the first lap. 2 things immediately caught my attention. 1, Denny Hamlin's car had a piece of his right front that was flapping in the wind. And 2, and surprisingly, Chase Elliott, who had started 3rd, was at the back of the pack. That's unfortunately the price you pay for being at the track, as you don't necessarily see everything happen. Well, upon returning to the media center and further review, I learned what everyone else knew, that Ross Chastain, just a week after having a conversation at Atlanta with Carson Hocevar about being aggressive, did just that and drove it hard into turn 1, or Calamity Corner as it has become known, and spun the 2020 Cup Series champion. But then Hamlin's torn up right front was a mystery. I soon discovered it was Fox living up to their low standard and not showing anything about it. However, thankfully the crew at Max and the in-car cameras gave me the answer. I don't know if you saw it, but the number 11 car was damaged in an incident with his teammate, Ty Gibbs. An incident that included Gibbs getting airborne yet again after the number 54 was caught in the middle of a 3-wide sandwich with Hamlin to his inside and Connor Zilisch on his outside. In the end, Hamlin's car was torn up, but Zilisch appeared to suffer the most damage and was forced to make a stop on pit road. And to think, that was just the first lap. Just 10 laps later, and I was watching the race on my computer and noticed something odd. Leader Shane Van Gisbergen was completely cutting the corner in turn 6. I mean, blatantly obvious. I actually shared the post on X because I didn't see anyone else talking about it. My Athlon coworker, Justin Schuler, actually went and spoke with a NASCAR official who came and visited with us and said that they would not be policing cutting the corners for that turn. All I could think was, WTF, really? Why was that turn not going to be policed? Turns out, I wasn't the only one confused by the non-calls for that turn. A short time later on Fox, they aired Kyle Busch's radio asking the same thing about what was going on because he saw other drivers clearly cutting the corner. There's much more to this story, and I'll get back to it in the post-race interviews. In that first stage, SVG, Busch, and Tyler Reddick ran out front, but as we've seen on road courses in the past, there's always a decision between earning stage points or racing for the win. Bubba Wallace, who got a penalty in that first stage, stayed out and earned his first stage win on a road course. The two 2311 racing cars of Wallace and Tyler Reddick were impressive for the weekend, in qualifying, sitting on the front row, and running up front early in the day. In Stage 2, SVG and Busch swapped the lead on multiple occasions. Again, when the stage concluded, Ryan Preece earned the stage win while the top cars pitted earlier and followed their plans to race for the win. In that third and final stage, it was, I think, in my estimation, the best racing we've seen at COTA in the 5 years of NASCAR visiting the track. Busch was clearly one of the best cars, leading a race-high 42 laps, including much of that final stage. But as the laps dwindled, Christopher Bell kept getting closer and closer. If I'm being honest, all I could think as I watched the number 20 car pursue his former JGR teammate was what happened last year, when Bell sent Busch for a spin, and I was right there post-race when Rowdy confronted Bell on pit road and got in his face. There were a couple of occasions when Bell drove it in hard going into turn 1, but missed his mark and narrowly averted hitting the RCR car and sending it for a spin. But Bell, who won last week at Atlanta, showed his skill and eventually navigated his way around Busch to take the lead and held off William Byron in the final laps to record the win and establish himself as the early championship favorite. After the race in the media center, Bell talked about how he felt there were multiple missed opportunities in 2024, and this year he's hoping to capitalize on them more. 2 out of 3 races ending in wins, and I'd say he's off to a hell of a start. In the post-race interviews, I was really curious to hear what the drivers had to say about the confusion in Turn 6. And who do you think I went to first for that answer? The one driver who talked about it during the race broadcast, Kyle Busch.
I heard they were going to police turns 4, 5, and 6, and then it turned into 3, 4, 5. And yesterday it was only 4 and 5. So they ain't got a clue.
You may not like Busch, but I absolutely love his candor. He's not afraid of being honest and sharing what's on his mind. In the media center, I also asked Christopher Bell about the Turn 6 confusion.
There was some confusion with turn 6 and early in the race.
There was a lot of confusion.
All right, elaborate for me, please.
Well, I was watching the Xfinity race yesterday, and I saw several guys cut turn 6 and not get penalties. And I'm like, man, that's really weird, really weird. And then early in the race, I saw several competitors in front of me cut turn 6 and break the rule. And thankfully, Adam got on the radio, I don't remember what it was, probably about 20, 30, and he's like, hey, they're not going to police track limits in turn 6. So that changed the way that all of us attacked turn 6, and it changed the race for sure. For the better or the worse, I don't know, but it definitely changed the style of, or the technique that you use to get through there.
So, by my count, that's 3 controversies in as many races to start the 2025 season. The first 2 weeks were cautions being thrown or not being thrown on the last lap, and then the COTA cutting corners chaos and confusion. The 2025 campaign is off to a rousing start. All right, guys, that's it for today's episode. I want to hear your thoughts. Let's go back to Saturday and let me know what you thought about what Kyle Busch and Joey Logano had to say about Larry Mac's proposal of racing to the checkered flag. And what about Busch's response on the playoff committee and not being included? As for the race, I'm curious to hear if you were equally confused about what was happening in Turn 6 as everyone else. And finally, what did you think about the race and that finish with Bell overtaking Busch and holding off William Byron for the victory? And before I wrap it up, I want to thank all of you for the incredibly kind words in my quote-unquote Daytona 500 recap. In a very tough situation, those comments were so nice to read. I really and truly appreciate every single one of you guys who watch the channel. This community has become a family to me, and I'm so grateful for your support in both good and bad times. Seriously, thank you for your incredible kindness. And thanks to those of you who showed up at the tweet up yesterday. That was a lot of fun. Thanks again for supporting the channel. I really and truly appreciate it and hope you have a great rest of your day.